Hello, everyone. We have a special guest with us today. We have Stanley Cohen. He's been on the show before. He's an attorney, an activist, a freedom fighter. Many Zionists call him a self-hating Jew, which I'm sure he'll laugh about very proudly. Stanley, thank you for coming on. It's really great to have you. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Thanks for your invitation. They went yesterday, figuratively, expecting the hugs, the kisses, welcome to the club. We're all brothers. This is Abraham Accord 3. And they didn't get it.
Right.
What they got instead was a suspension on a decision and impaneling a commission of, I believe, 6 other states or 7 other states to spend the next year investigating whether or not Israel should, in fact, be admitted.
Right.
So I've noticed in the Israeli press, they the typical Hezbollah snatching, victory from defeat, as they always do, no matter what. They claim it to be a victory, but it's anything but a victory. They were supposed to be voted in yesterday, but instead were met with a unanimous vote that said, we're not ready to admit you full-time and permanently. We need to investigate this as a body. We need to take a look at your history. We need to take a look at your status. We will then get together in a year and make a decision.
This is, I think, a panel of 8 countries that they've appointed, right? And I think Algeria, South Africa, who've been very opposed to, Israel getting this observer status. They're on that. I think Nairobi as well, and I think we have Congo as well.
But I think the big problem Israel has is, you can just imagine the horror over the next year. You can just imagine how much worse Israel will make it for itself. How much more over the next year Israel will establish itself as a war criminal, as someone who scoffs at international law, who commits crimes against humanity. This is not a year in which one can expect Israel to be comport themselves with human rights, with dignity, with decency, with morality, and with principle. This is a year, given where Israel has always been, and especially the last year, 2, 3, 4, 5, where you can expect the absolute worst. So I have little doubt in my mind that a year from now, when a final decision is made, Israel's going to lose. And keep in mind, independent of the decision by the AU, we still have our court case pending in the Commission on Human and People's Rights. So they will at some time weigh in. They may decide to wait to see what happens a year from now, where they may continue with an additional investigation. We're not sure. So for those in Israel who are jumping up and down, screaming win, 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 it's like Israel describing itself as a democracy. It's silly.
Yeah, I saw them on I-24, which is this Israeli channel, describing it as a win. I think they brought the Israeli ambassador to South Africa, or former Israeli ambassador to South Africa, and he was describing it as a win. So, I mean, it's hilarious. It's really hilarious. And how is the work going with you and the other lawyers who are trying to file this complaint against Israel being given?
It's fine. We're contemplating we've been working on a supplemental submission, because keep in mind, we filed a legal complaint, not directly with the AU, but the commission that speaks for the AU in international matters, that's vested and tasked with the responsibility to seek compliance with international law, to give meaning and fruition to the constitutions of the body politic of the African Union. And we believe that over the course of the year, they will move. We have asked for discovery. We have asked for disclosure. We've made various demands. Who knows? Our work may end up being done by this committee of 7 or 8 states that is comprised of a very active body politic. I think the desperation in the release, and the tone of the release by the executive, who unilaterally granted Israel the temporary observer status, I think that speaks volumes. I think this stretch to justify why he did it, why it was appropriate, was this mountain of excuse, of rationale, of myth, and of tea leaves. I think that speaks volumes. I remain convinced that a year from now, Israel will not receive the permanent seat as an observer, with observer status in the African Union.
I mean, what are they going to do if they don't receive it?
We know what they're going to do. They're going to scream they hate us. They're going to say they all hate us. The whole world hates us. So that'll be an interesting, because given the fact that Israel has now, Zionists are now self-describing as indigenous people, as largely a community of color. So what will be the Western indigenous white Jews of Europe pointing a finger at a continent of color and saying it's racist. That's what Israel do. They hate us. They all hate us. It's racist. And they're afraid of us because they're afraid of what we stand for. I could write the Israeli Hasbara right now. It doesn't change. They just substitute in new states, new names, new players, new outrages, and new excuses.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels a lot like that. And just a week ago, we had this Amnesty Report, which came out, which I'm sure you saw, which says that Israel is, it's an apartheid entity. For some reason, I saw Amnesty. They apparently they won't take a position on the occupation itself. But in any case, you have this Amnesty Report coming out, and then the African Union sort of kicking this over to 2023. What do you think is going through their minds? They seem to be losing the war on the propaganda front, on the Hasbara front, right?
Well, look. A week ago, their soldiers, or 2 weeks ago, murdered an 80-year-old American citizen.
Right.
A day or two before that, they murdered a 10-year-old child. The slaughter continues. The land theft continues. The hate continues. This comes on the heels of designating, 10 or 12 or 13 internationally respected human rights organizations, NGOs in Israel, as terrorists, and that fell flat on its face with not a shred of evidence. Yeah. I see a European colonial project desperate to rewrite history, not a decade ago, but today. I don't think they can do it. I don't think that Israelis have the ability of self-control. I don't think Israelis have the capacity to operate a nation, a state, a culture, a community, a system of government, a judicial system that comports with international law, with international standards of decency, and with human rights. So I think Israel realized it's in a host of trouble. And today, we find out that the trial of Netanyahu has been postponed because apparently it seems Netanyahu's defense has been using Israeli spyware to spy on witnesses. Yep. So we're talking about we're talking about Sparta falling apart. And with most societies that catch themselves, there's an opportunity to improve. There's an opportunity to grow. There's an opportunity to work. There's an opportunity to not rewrite, but to improve and better body politic and horizon. It doesn't happen with Israel. It becomes uglier by the day. It becomes more racist by the day. It becomes more reactionary by the day. And it becomes more repulsive to the world body politic in general. They fought a huge battle. Spent billions of dollars against BDS. They've lost it. Yep. They've spent endless energy, time, and resources in getting into Africa. For now, they've lost it. They've spent all this energy in designating NGOs as terrorist organizations. They've lost it. They now have, I read today, there's this ghost of Oslo, where a Kumbaya Palestinian who was involved in '92 and an Israeli intellectual have gotten together, trying to put together a light a candle, sing a chant to become one, in which if a million Jews that are illegal settlers, that are criminals, are allowed to seek from Palestine residency, that's cool, and Palestinians that want to seek residency from Israel, that's cool, and we'll sing Kumbaya and move on. So we're seeing this out of control, ignorance, desperation, hatred, all dressed up in the typical Hasbara that's falling on its face everywhere. And to those Israelis, when I read again the story today, who think yesterday's decision in Africa was a victory, the earth is flat, and I have a bridge to tell you. You got your ass kicked yesterday, and it's going to get worse.
Yeah, I mean, I regularly see you, slicing trolls in half on Twitter. It's quite a sight, honestly. They really they don't stop with you. They're always going after you, and you handle them quite admirably, I must say. And yeah, I saw a couple of those comments. Yeah.
Well, today's was funny because I'm an attorney who was a former social worker, community activist, whose godfather was Panamanian and a man of color whose family is of color. Whose partner of 25 years is Mohawk, and there was this post about how I hate black people and I'm just getting ready to murder all the Jews. You know, someone who has spent his entire career as a social worker, an organizer, as a lawyer, as a legal aid attorney, as a writer, representing communities of color, working on behalf of the despaired, the despised, the disaffected. All of a sudden, I hate black people. I hate people of color. So the way it works is Zionists are people of color. Since I want to kill all the people of all the Zionists, that's the claim today. Obviously, I hate people of color. I mean, it's insane.
It's real mental gymnastics.
These posts come from people that have 15 followers that look to them for sage words and inspiration. And it's like, where are you from? What planet? Is this like the D team of the Israeli $2 an hour to get on Twitter or social media or social platforms to speak out? You know, and then you have someone like Greenblatt who turns around and says, this is the head of the ADL, who turns around and publicly and proudly says, if you accuse Israel of genocide, Israel admits it's genocide by what they do. They make excuses for it. If you accuse Israel of genocide, then you are the counterpart to ISIS. And as the counterpart to ISIS, you can't get a position in the United States government. I mean, it's lunacy. You've got this desperate 11th hour reach. There's 6 minutes before midnight to resurrect, to justify, to explain away 73 years of unbroken hate and violence and dispossession and political detention and suppression. It just doesn't work, but they don't get it. They just think all we have to keep saying is they all hate us. They all hate us. They all hate us. And we're the chosen, and they win. Yeah,
I mean, I have a tweet over here. This is from the managing director of public affairs at the American Jewish Committee, right? And he used to be previously the IDF spokesperson, which I think tells you everything you need to know. But look what he says. He says, quote, "If I had a dime for every Israeli who gave me a blank look when I referenced the Amnesty Report this past week." I mean, it's like, I don't know. This is kind of like a weak admission that, yeah, it's true, but we're going to act like we don't care about it and like it doesn't exist. And oh, yeah, no one's heard of this in Israel.
You know, if I was Israel, I would be thrilled over the Amnesty Report. Amnesty Report does not get into the war crimes, the genocide, the crimes against humanity, the ethnic cleansing, the European colonial project. Amnesty, if I was Israel, I would say, this is not so bad. They just accuse us of being a race and religious and the faith-based hate group. That's okay. They ignore the crimes against humanity. They ignore the violence. They ignore everything else that is out there, and Israel is complaining. But of course, Amnesty is filled with Jew haters. We all know that. Anyone, every human rights organization in the world, every NGO in the world, every individual in the world that takes a principled stand based upon fact, evidence, and truth that points a finger at Israel hates Jews.
Yeah, I'm just putting the tweet up on the screen, but I couldn't agree more with you, Stanley. It's really like, you know, they should be thrilled because it's keeping out all of the other stuff. And Amnesty themselves are saying, well, we don't take a position on the occupation. I was scratching my head for a second. I was like, are you guys high or something? Like that's way worse. You know, like even people who've lived in apartheid South Africa, like the late Bishop Desmond Tutu, he himself said that it's worse, which is really saying something. You know, it's not about like a competition here, but when you have people who've been through the same thing, coming around and saying, you know, you guys need to wake up. This is also horrible. It's just as bad as what we had in South Africa, maybe even worse. I mean, that says a lot, you know, and they're acting like, you know, like it doesn't exist. That really confuses me. And I just wanted to ask you what you think of the role that these Western NGOs play, if they're willing to say, okay, Israel's an apartheid entity, but they don't look at the occupation, the war crimes, and everything else you just outlined.
I think a decision has been made by the one area where Israel has been successful as being the bully, has being, you know, they raise the anti-Semitism, they raise the Jew hating, they raise they exploit the Holocaust, they exploit the history, some that's real, some that's not real, and it sort of pushes like what they did with Goldstone in the accusing them of genocide during, I guess, 2009, that attack, one of 50 against Gaza. Yeah. So they have what they've done is they've made a conscious effort to try to bully, to try to manipulate, to try to twist and try to push in the hope that it's damage control. And instead of getting a complete, a fact-based, a total evaluation and representation of what Israel is, this beast of Israel, they say, okay, let's keep it low. Now, what I find so interesting about apartheid, an apartheid system is the whole 9 yards. An apartheid system is the Bantustan of the West Bank. An apartheid system is the Bantustan and concentration camp of Gaza. Apartheid is the Bantustan of Quds. Apartheid is the nation state which exalts Judaism to the exclusion of all other faiths or non-faiths, which has 65 laws which on their face give preeminent and priority treatment to Jews as opposed to anyone else. It's all apartheid.
Yeah.
But even when you get beyond apartheid, you cannot separate. How does it maintain, promote, and protect its apartheid? It does it by war crimes.
Yeah.
It does it by crimes against humanity. It's not, quote unquote, simply putting fences up. It's Soweto could easily be the national flag of Israel. I mean, 1 outrage, 2 outrages, 3 outrages. In South Africa, you had political activists that all died of suicide. No matter who killed them, there was all suicide. In Israel, they no longer even use the pretext. At one point, they would claim someone drowned in the Sinai. Now they just say, we killed them. It's okay. We slapped the hands of those 2 officers. The 80-year-old, the American citizen who was murdered by Israeli soldiers, either intentionally or by negligence or by whether it be manslaughter, and they walked away from, we're going to put them on suspension for a few weeks and a few leaves. We're going to give them a kumbaya course. So it's reached the point with Israel that even unlike in South Africa, where the South African government tried to make excuses for apartheid, for war crimes, for crimes against humanity, for violence, for assassination, Israel no longer tries to make excuses. They simply rely upon the talisman, the chant, the choir that screams, they all hate us, poor us, we're surrounded by these rabid Arab states that are trying to kill us, and we have a right to defend ourselves. That's Israel.
Yeah, and just for context, to show people what you're talking about here, you're mentioning Omar Assad. So he's a Palestinian American. He's 78, and they're saying he died of a heart attack. I mean, it's the guy was just going about his day, and he winds up dead. Explain that to me. Why you always have Palestinians being brutalized and they end up dead, and like you said, they're put on suspension. Nothing is actually done to them. Even when they killed Iyad Hala, this 32-year-old in Jerusalem who had autism, they just executed him, and it's like the cameras don't work anymore.
Well, George Floyd died of asphyxiation because a cop put his knee in his neck. It's still murder.
Right.
I mean, in the United States, if you drag a 78-year-old, and it happens, in the United States, if you drag a 78-year-old man into a basement, you tie his hands, you tie his mouth, you put him on his stomach or his back, you leave him alone and you walk away and they die, it's at least manslaughter.
Yep.
It's a willful disregard for human life. And in the case of Israel, it's not an accident. I mean, case after case after case, death by breathing. They were on the street, a 10-year-old, a 30-year-old, an 80-year-old. But, at what point does the world community say, the rhetoric no longer binds us? The reality is just so damning and biting and undeniable that we have to take action. The debate recently in the United States over whether to give Israel another billion or 2 or 5 or 12 for whatever. Yeah. And I guess it was Bernie Sanders or someone else said, well, we'll give Palestine $1 billion. Well, great. You'll write a check, you'll give it to Israel, and you'll let Israel to decide what they're going to do with the $1 billion. And of that, they'll charge tax for $900 million, and they'll give the PA $100 million, and the PA will use it for their 401ks and their homes and their retirements, and life will go on. So the real question is, at what point does the world tire enough? At what point does the world grow disgusted enough? At what point does BDS begin to impact other world communities, other economic systems so badly that they begin to say no more, can't do it any longer? And I think you're beginning to see it increasingly. Although today I understand a journalist in Germany lost their job.
Yep, I saw that too. Yep.
Simply because they're writing something critical of Palestine. I have some friends that were in the process of putting together a gathering, a get-together in Brooklyn this summer, a Palestinian festival with people from the United States and from outside the country, that they had worked out a venue for the festival and was all set, and they were moving on entertainment. Suddenly, from nowhere, it gets canceled. So I'm speaking to my friend, and we both say to each other, we know why it got canceled. You have an academic, a famed academic in the UK that gets suspended.
Yeah,
for teaching.
David Miller. Yeah,
I mean, the Palestinian academic who gets suspended. It's glaring. It's brazen. It's so indifferent to any standard of common decency. And I think the arrival of the Amnesty International report, with all of its warts, the results in South Africa, the failure to satisfy the world community that they had evidence to prove that the designated NGOs were quote unquote terrorist organizations.
That's incredible.
The loss in the UK, where an academic has been put back on staff. Another defeat in the last 2 or 3 weeks of BDS in the United States. If I'm Israel, I'm sitting down and I'm in damage control. I have to look in the mirror and say, I just can't keep waving flags and saying they all hate us. It's beyond that point.
That was really incredible with the NGOs that you mentioned. Again, I'm going to repeat this for the viewers, even though I've reported on it. It's still worth mentioning again. The Israeli defense minister, Benny Gantz, he basically took 6 Palestinian NGOs and declared them to be terrorist organizations, effectively outlawed them. And Damir is one of them. I interviewed them, and they got their offices raided. All of these groups, they basically can't operate anymore. I mean, that's really something that, you'll hear them say, oh, Syria did that, North Korea did that. And then, it's like they just casually do it. It doesn't even really make headlines. No one blinks. No one bats an eye. I don't know. I think it's incredible. They won't even leave the NGOs alone. It's like, they can't really do anything on the ground. It's just they publish damning reports, which are important. But I mean, it's not even like a military sort of challenge or something. And they just outlaw them. It's really.
Well, at what point does Israel say B'Tselem is a group of Jew haters, a Jewish organization that's been around for decades, who's been cited, and when favorable to Israel, Israel will cite them, but when not favorable, when does the Jew hater come out when dealing with B'Tselem?
Right.
Sooner or later, I wish. What do you say to the person who says, "I wish everyone would stop following me," and they look around over their shoulder and there's no one there? I mean, what do you say when the whole world says you're wrong and you run out of the whole world is filled with Jew haters and people that are blind?
I mean, I've seen you posting on Twitter also about this very interesting, because you mentioned it a bit before, but this fact that you have Israelis claiming that they're Semitic and Palestinians are not Semitic. Like, I mean, just the root of the term, that doesn't make sense to me at all.
Well, the other day I had some fun with Zionists, and they ended up walking into their own trap, and they foisted themselves on their own petard, because, at one point, the reason why Jews are Semitic is because they come from the Middle East.
Right.
So when you ask, all right, if you're Semitic because you come from the Middle East, what of all the Middle Easterners, are they Semitic? Because if they're Semitic and you're screaming death to Arabs, then you've got one group of Semites being anti-Semitic to another group of Semites. So then they shift into, no, it's about language. And you're Semitic on the basis of your language, but that's a trap, because you then walk into the parallel of Arabic, which comes from the region. And then the most recent one is that, no, Semitism actually came out of the middle of the 19th century. It's a European reduction or description of Jews who were speaking Yiddish and not Hebrew in any event. And then it brought to its zenith by Hitler, who used Semitism as the cudgel for genocide against Jews. So if that is if that's the opportune theory, does that mean that Semitism only developed in the mid-19th century? So what about all the claims of it having roots back to the Middle East, or the claims of it being parallel to Arabic? And it's they just keep foisting themselves on their own petard.
Yeah.
You've got largely this audience of Ashkenazi Jews who treat Sephardic Jews and Middle Eastern Jews as dirt, who treat African Jews as subhuman, who continue to exalt a European colonial project as if it is this indigenous movement that 3,000 years ago was somewhere else. The real question that I pose repeatedly to American and Western Zionists, the city of Syracuse in upstate New York is about, it's, I don't know, 30, 40, 50,000 people, whatever it is. And it's got 10,000 or 8,000 Jews. I'm not sure what it is. It's 10, 15 miles from at least 2 North American indigenous native communities. So I asked Jewish listeners and Zionist listeners if they would have a problem if my clients, some of them are my clients, would come to the city of Syracuse with AR-15s, destroy their homes, destroy their businesses, take their land, which was theirs up to 200 years ago or 150 years ago. So this notion that Zionists, that a European colonial project has a legitimate basis to recover, to recoup by force of arms, by force of terrorism, by force of genocide, land that they once occupied 3,000 years ago, but yet indigenous communities in North America, which up to 200 years ago were controlled by indigenous communities, people have a right to live in comfort, to be left alone. And if indigenous tribes showed up and said, off my property with an AR-15 and looked at them and said, well, someone's going to steal it sooner or later, that's a problem?
Yeah.
I mean, the inconsistencies, and it's one of the reasons why, the quote, leading Zionists won't debate me. We did that in the Doha debates with Fromm 20 years ago. Subsequent occasion at the Intel, where I debated the former Israeli ambassador. Dershowitz, I had my 10 minutes with on radio. They run away. So you get left with these empty vats of rhetoric. Because when you apply history, when you apply facts, when you apply reality and truth to the Zionist myth, to its screen of dishonesty and falsehood, it loses every time. It's a house of cards. And if you know what the cards are about, you can knock it down.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with everything you said. You made an excellent point there about the natives in America. If that parallel, what would they say then? But the thing is also, like, I just like, it never made sense to me how they're calling. I don't know. I feel like it's so dishonest how they reduce the whole thing to pretending like Arabs hate Jews or something. Like this is fundamentally dishonest, because even in Damascus, where I was born, we have a Jewish quarter in Damascus. My mother was born there. So you have Christians, Palestinians living with Muslims and Jews in the same area, and there's nothing like what they're describing. And I feel like they're trying to use the something that happened in Europe, the Holocaust, and say that Arabs are doing something. So it's just absurd, and it's like they're insulting the Holocaust and using that, they're weaponizing it,
Well, I think Jews, many, the young ones in particular, don't even know about the Spanish Inquisition, where the Jewish community was saved by Muslims. They fail to understand the history in the run-up in World War I, the run-up to World War II, and during that, where Palestinians and Muslims and Arabs protected as many as they could, that it's a community that has lived together historically. There have been problems. There are problems with my next door neighbor a mile from me. There are problems in New York City. There are problems everywhere. But the notion that somehow Jews were, because they were, quote unquote, driven from a land 3,000 years ago, and subsequently became a people with direction because of the development of Zionism in Europe in the mid-19th century, that all of a sudden legitimatized a 3,000-year-old faith and then took the lead. The notion that empowers them to seek to recover, to reclaim by force of arms, by weapons, by crimes against humanity, a landmass that they have been distanced from for thousands of years, but even a landmass where Jewish and Christian and Muslims lived together side by side for the millennium, with the trouble only developing with the arrival of the Irgun and the Palmach and the Stern Gang and the Haganah. And that didn't happen after the Holocaust. That happened before the Holocaust.
Right, that's true.
Hamas didn't exist at that point. The state of Israel didn't exist at that point. World War II hadn't begun at that point.
Yeah.
The Holocaust wasn't in full-on horror at that point. European Jews began to ship arms, to send terrorists, to seize land, to assassinate, to bomb, to take homes in the 30s that were Palestinian, and on occasion had been Jews. Their bombings on occasion killed Jews. Their assassinations included the British, because a European colonial project not based upon faith, but based upon greed, based upon what they saw as a secular agenda, took hold. Let's not forget, it could have been Uganda. I mean, pick your land. Let's decide where we want to go. It's again, when you parse the facts, when you deal with reality, when you deal with the history, the Zionist rhetoric, the Zionist agenda, the Zionist, the excuse, it dissipates, it falls, it collapses. It always ends up, you hate the Jews, you're a self-hating Jew, you hate us all, and we have a right. That's what it ends up with. No matter how much you box people into a corner, in the marketplace of ideas, an exchange, a debate, a colloquy, it ends up, you want to kill us and you hate us. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said is true. The Haganah, Hashemite, all of this stuff was, it was well in we're talking about late 19th century, early 20th century. And like you said, there was also the Hotel David, King David hotel bombing.
King David, yeah.
Yeah, and so many other things, right? I mean, and like you said, they were even killing other Jews who were opposed to Zionism. And even, just if I can draw a parallel right now, in Sheikh Jarrah, where they're evicting all these families, there are even Jews among the people being evicted.
Sure.
It's just, sure. I don't know. It's all of these
arguments
they fall over.
They're not good Jews. You see, they've got the good Jew, bad Jew dichotomy. Yeah. As long as you toe the line, and as long as you provide the pretext, the excuse, as long as you chant the chant, you're the good Jew. If you're Finkelstein, if you're Chomsky, if you're other historians, if you're Cohen, you're bad Jews. It's and what I find most interesting, the real bad Jews tend to be those Jews that my age, in their 60s, people in their 70s, people that have lived long lives in reflection, in accomplishment, in fighting, in experience, people that understand very well what's going on. We're the bad Jews. It's as if we woke up one day and just decided to say, kill Jews, or Israel is a war criminal. And it's not based upon decades of education, of experience, of on-the-ground observation, of participation. That's what's so perverse about this, where once in Judaism, the call was to respect one's elders, to look to experience, to look to education, to look to a voice rooted in life, as a guidepost to respect and to admire. Now, for those of us who refuse to embrace blindly the chant, for those of us who expose the chant, for those of us who challenge the falsehood, we're the bad Jews. And there's nothing I prefer more than hearing some 21-year-old wannabe self-professed Zionist from Brooklyn teaching me about history, talking to me about Judaism, talking to me about my life, who I am, what I've done, where I've been, and why. It's great.
It's incredible.
You don't even shave, kid. Go away. I mean, really. It's bizarre.
They think they're more well informed, and I find it often they end up with personal attacks and personal smears, so they just completely derail the conversation to go somewhere else. So
it's all deflection. It's because it's a slippery slope. Once you begin to talk about history, you're lost. Once my grandfather, I was having a discussion with someone the other day. My grandfather and my great uncle were Narodniks. Narodniks were anti-Zionists that were political militants in Russia in the late 1800s and were involved in attacks on the Tsar, on the family. There was violence, there were murders, and he and his brother were put on a boat by my great grandmother and sent to Africa for safety. So there's a history in my family of resistance, of taking stands, of political call, which has passed down through the generations. But it gets washed away because I won't swallow the soap of Zionism. Somehow myself and others that travel with me, we're self-hating Jews. We don't buy it, so we hate ourselves. Or today's quote that I want to murder all Jews. So yeah, only on Christmas Day. I mean, it's absurd. And what they don't realize, and what they really don't care, is the accusation is so shallow, it's so stupid, it's so transparent, it accomplishes nothing. It's sort of like Greenblatt's rave, where I said years ago that, and this will be accused of being anti-Semitic, but I've accused Zionists as being, anti-Semitism full on as they walk down the street. I mean, so many of the problems that are triggered with regard to Jewish communities are triggered by a seed of hatred, a seed of violence, a seed of oppression, a seed of anger, a seed of violation of international law that the world sees. Now, I'm not excusing, justifying, writing away anti-Semitism. I'm not accusing, writing away, supporting neo-Nazism. I'm not supporting anyone going after Jews. I'm not at all. That's not the point.
Right.
The point is you can't keep screaming, you all hate us. We're the chosen ones. That's why you're coming after us, while you offend or support violation of international law, commit genocide, violation of human rights, and maintain a system of apartheid. That's the lesson to take away. And it just grows worse day by day.
Yeah, and to that point, I can't help but notice Netanyahu a few years back meeting with, these a Ukrainian who has neo-Nazis in his party. All of a sudden, that doesn't matter anymore. I mean, this is absurd. They have these incredible contradictions, and I don't know. I don't know what to say. I mean, it's incredible that they then have no problem with anti-Semitism, dealing with these kinds of people.
Well, they find comfort in Donald Trump.
Right.
And
they loved him.
Jews will not replace us. Jews will not replace us. There are good people on both sides. They find comfort in evangelical movements in the United States that are fundamentally supremacist, anti-Semitic, not just in the sense of hating Jews, but hating Arabs, hating people from the Middle East, hating everyone from everywhere else. They find it's this notion that, it's interesting. I remember growing up talking to a friend of mine, the whole colloquy between how Christian self-professed Zionists, Israel and Jews, they break bread together, and someone saying to me, a Jew saying to me, well, the way it works is the Israeli Jews think when push comes to shove, we no longer need them, we'll get rid of them. And the evangelical Christians believing when push comes to shove and we take over Jerusalem, we'll get rid of the Jews. So it's this marriage of perverse fantasy. I remember back in the day when I was still able to go to Israel, although I would simply go to Israel, arrive, and go to Palestine. And I remember once being at the West Wall and being lectured by an evangelical Christian as being disrespectful. They had recognized me. And we were talking about this, and they had a visitor's pass. They were evangelical Christians from Alabama that were in foots because they had gotten a visitor's pass. And there they were lecturing me over Judaism, over my politics, over my belief, over my role. And I just looked at him and I just went, Yahoo! Welcome to Alabama. I mean, it's so perverse. It's so desperate.
It is, and to that point, Stanley, I would just add one thing because both these religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they come from this region, from the Levant, from Syria, from Palestine. And when I see these evangelicals, I mean, I have no clue what that has to do with the Christianity that's practiced in Syria and Palestine. It's two completely different worlds, and they want to come and lecture people on both things, on Judaism and Christianity. It's so detached from reality, it's embarrassing.
Well, the reality of it is the evangelical Christians largely come from a white Southern movement that's based upon race and supremacy. And I'm not saying all, I'm sure there are plenty of evangelical Christians that are good women and men, that are observant women and men that support their community, that are involved in helping people of color and fellow travelers to speak of. But when you really get down to the right, the rural right, especially in the South and the Midwest and the northern part of the United States, it is a movement that is based upon racial supremacy. It is a movement based upon political supremacy. It is a movement based upon privilege, which doesn't exist because so many of them are treated like dirt by the community. I'm not talking about communities of color. I'm not talking about communities of diversity. I'm talking about the local white power structure. But they break bread with fellow travelers that embrace and are built of supremacy, are built of arrogance, are built of privilege, and it reinforces their notion. It's bizarre.
Yeah. Stanley, I know you have so much important work to do, and I could talk to you for literally hours, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. Are there any closing remarks that you wanted to add about Israel and the African Union, or anything else that we touched on?
No. I want to thank you as always. It's informative. I love your show. You're great. The questions you ask, the issues you push, the controversies you raise are very important. They're very helpful. They're very meaningful.
Thank you so much.
I want to speak to young activists in particular out there, who are tired, perhaps, who feel at times beaten. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's day by day. It's issue by issue. It's cause by cause. It's maintaining principle and purpose and voice and vision. And sooner or later, we prevail. Issue by issue, struggle by struggle. And I have no doubt in my mind, I've been involved in the struggle on the ground, as you know, over the liberation and justice for Palestine for going on 30 years. I have no doubt in my mind there will come a time where Palestinians throughout the world, in the diaspora community, where Palestinians in all of Palestine are liberated, are free, have full protection. And I have no doubt that's coming, and I suspect it's going to be surely in my lifetime. And with that, I want to thank you. I want to thank your audience.
Thank you.
And up the rebels.
Thank you, Stanley. I really take your words to heart. I'm just going to put your Twitter up on the screen so people can follow. It's at Stanley Cohen Law. And Stanley is absolutely wonderful. Definitely go follow him. Again, thank you so much for coming on the program. My mother's a huge fan. She says hello and thank you for everything. So take
Give
that
my
from
salams
both.
to your mom.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Stanley. Good luck tomorrow.
Thank you for the invitation. Take care. Thank
you. Bye-bye. All right, so that was lovely. Stanley is really amazing. Like I said, I'm going to put his Twitter up on the screen, at Stanley Cohen Law. And I also did a full, a longer interview with Stanley. It's on the channel, where we talked about, again, Israel and the African Union a few months ago. And we didn't just talk about that. We talked also about his life. I mean, you guys have no clue how interesting Stanley's life is. Like he like you said, like we talked about, he's an attorney, but he's also defended. They tried to get Palestinians from Hamas, right? The leader of Hamas extradited from the U.S. to Israel. He stopped them, right? Because they arrested him at JFK, I think it was. He knows the leadership of Hamas. He knows the actual Palestinian resistance. And he just said it to you himself. Like, he's been involved in this for 30 years. So I can't encapsulate his life and the things he's done as well as he can. So definitely go watch that. He's really, really a remarkable person. And it probably speaks volumes just by telling you that he's banned from Israel. He suspects that he's also banned from Egypt because of another thing that he was, another complaint that he raised about how they were treating, I think it was Palestinians also, right? But he's certainly banned from Israel, which speaks volumes. You must be really pressing some buttons if they ban you from Israel as a Jew, right? So he's just great, and please go watch that. It's really a fantastic insight into his life, his family history, and his work. He's really remarkable. Someone in the comments says, greetings from Algeria, let's go. Ahlan wa sahlan. Algeria is really great because Algeria is one of those countries that's really not just saying that they're with the Palestinians. They're actually with the Palestinians. Just to our point, when we're talking about the African Union, one of the countries that was completely against Israel being given this observer status is Algeria, right? And the other is South Africa, because South Africa has been through apartheid. They know exactly what's going on in Palestine. They know this beast of apartheid. They know this beast of racism and colonialism. And so it's not a coincidence that South Africa, Algeria, they're leading the charge. And there are actually a bunch of other countries, right? There's I think well over a dozen countries that are in opposition to this. But just to speak to the ones that have really been at the forefront, it's definitely Algeria and South Africa, not just yesterday, but the entire time. And so, Algerians are very proud people. They should be. And they're just great for always standing with the Palestinians. It puts some other Arab countries to shame. You can look at, for example, Bahrain. Again, not the people, the governments, right? Because the people, I think in every Arab country are standing fully behind the Palestinians. But it puts other Arab governments to shame. If you look at Bahrain, you look at Saudi Arabia, you look at the UAE, these countries, they're fake. They're not with the Palestinians. Saudi Arabia, I've no doubt they will normalize ties one day, but Bahrain and the UAE already did. You would never see Algeria do that. Like, put that out of your mind. So that speaks volumes about their position, their commitment, their drive in helping the Palestinians. Because they don't get anything from you. You have to remember something. When you stand with the Palestinians or you stand with the resistance, whether it's in Lebanon or in Syria or in Palestine, it costs you a lot. I'm not just talking money. It costs you politically. It comes with a big price. A lot of countries don't want to pay this price, so they're cowards. They just go with what's popular. They acknowledge Israel, they accept Israel, and they don't stand up for the Palestinians. It takes courage to stand up for the Palestinians. It's not easy, right? And Algeria is definitely one of those countries. So, and I don't have to mention to you that Algeria had the French, right? The La Guerre d'Indépendance, like the Independence War. This. Man, it's been compared to a genocide. The number of Algerians that were killed by the French. It's incredible. La guerre d'indépendance. This is very, very important chapter in Algeria's history. So they know also what it's like to be colonized. They know what it's like to be oppressed.